God has a hard-on.
Perfect world, no dream, primitive cerebral.
He's a traitor! He's a sadist!
You're all going to die down here.
The greatest trick the devil ever pulled was convincing the world he didn't exist.
Welcome with kindness and love to Aeon Byte Gnostic Radio, an initiation by conversation into the dark corners of myth, magic, and meaning, a crash course in cult culture and conspiracy, a virtuous virus invoking and informing history, holiness, and heresy. Each week, I commandeer your connection to bring the most accepted and rejected scholars and provocateurs to your attention. Fun, compelling, and deeply weird, this is the blow-your-mind cocktail party conversation you always wanted to listen in on. To be inspired to resurrect your inner artist and indwelling inventor and innermost performer. To eradicate and do better than the creator gods and their insipid startup realities.
Good idea, O Lord. Of course it's a good idea.
Like Harold Bloom said, the central dictum of the Gnostics was and always will be, that which can be broken must be. Or as Hermann Hesse said in Damien, the bird fights its way out of the egg. The egg is the world. Who would be born must first destroy a world. The bird flies to God. That God's name is Abraxas. I am Abraxas in his meat space incarnation of Miguel Connor. And you are Abraxas too, beyond your meat space incarnation. And together, we're going to craft better worlds now. But first let us destroy this present world.
Yes, these are bruises from fighting. Yes, I'm comfortable with that. I am enlightened.
Adding to the show's ethos, amid all this creation and destruction, let us not forget the words of Oscar Wilde, who said, "We are all in the gutter, but some of us are looking at stars." Let us also look at stars together while creating better worlds.
It's all one ghetto, man. Giant gutter in outer space.
On this April, the year of our demiurge 2016, we are actually celebrating 10 years, my beloved truth seekers. 10 bloody and blood tear-soaked years. Awakening divine sparks one Valis ping beam at a time since 2006. I don't know why I truly do it, and the financials of the show haven't exactly made it to the Panama Papers. In the end, I do it for you and only you. I hope you have benefited from this red pill cafeteria, now on show number 325, and you are a little bit closer to defeating those inner and outer archons, creating a better world. The journey continues. The destination is your true Promethean self.
It's been a brilliant journey of self-awakening. Now you've simply got to ask yourself this. What is happiness to you?
I can't think of anyone better to celebrate our decade of blasphemy than our astral guest. This show wouldn't be possible without his influence. I still remember the moment someone told me about his work more than 10 years ago when I was at a Villa Park Freemason Lodge asking about this thing called Gnosticism. Then I bought his books and listened to his lectures, and off to the soul adventure races. Few can deny his invaluable contribution to Gnostic studies and theology in the last 3+ decades. That is Stephan Hoeller, who materializes at the Virtual Alexandria once again to talk about himself and about being a modern Gnostic. And they are one and the same. If you want a bit more detail on his journey from escaping both Nazi and communist oppression in Hungary, fleeing to Austria and Belgium, discovering theosophy and the French Gnostic revival, and settling in California to oversee the Ecclesia Gnostica, I would recommend his print interview on the Gnostic Journal 3. But you'll get some detail in our interviews as you gain some gnosis on the trials and tribulations and opportunities of what is Gnosticism in the 21st century.
He lied to us, Trinity. He tricked us. If you would have told us the truth, we would have told you to shove that red pill right up your ass.
For those of you who might not know, Stephan Hoeller is the bishop of the Ecclesia Gnostica in Los Angeles, as well as the author of such groundbreaking books as Gnosticism, A New Light on the Ancient Tradition of Inner Knowing, and Jung and the 7 Sermons to the Dead. The latter is still one of my favorite books on philosophical and psychological Gnosticism. If you want to find more about Stephan, visit what has been the perennial font of Gnostic studies for many years, Gnosis.org.
Once again, things that could have been brought to my attention yesterday!
More than a scholar and a sorcerer priest, Stephan is a man of grace and kindness. When Ellie was in the hospital last year for 3 months, Stephan lit a candle every Sunday at the church service. My wife and I are still deeply touched and forever grateful. And if you want to know, Ellie is doing very well now at 8 months old. Is there a connection? Well, you see, it's all connected. It's all connected. More than anything, Stephan truly exemplifies the ethos of Aeon by Gnostic Radio. That is, write your own gospel and live your own myth.
If we have souls, they are made of the love we share, undimmed by time, unbound by death.
I was listening to a podcast the other day on synchromysticism, the Sync book, between Alan Green and Chris Knowles. I agree with them when they said that the Gnostic attitude is perhaps the only approach one can have to survive these frenetic, absurd times. Ignorance no longer is bliss. In this digital age and surveillance state, you are bombarded every second with information and misinformation and disinformation. You can't escape. You can't hide. There are no safe spaces. You can't even hear yourself think. You will be molded by some marketer or political figure or fake guru. And they're all the same when you think about it. Ignorance is the greatest sin, as the Gospel of Philip says, but they are actually trying to make you ignorant of being ignorant, as Chomsky said. Therefore, the Gnostic impulse of skepticism, paranoia, alienation, wild visionary curiosity, and infernal parody is the way to see out of the black iron prison.
What truth? That you are a slave, Neo. Like everyone else, you were born into bondage, born into a prison that you cannot smell or taste or touch. A prison for your mind.
As the Greeks said, he whom the gods love, they simply kill. He whom the gods hate, they make mad first, and then they kill. The gods are angry, really angry, as humanity has opened its third eye a bit too wide and just asked too many questions. Now they will drown us not in a watery flood, but a flood of data and video and clickbait blog posts and social media storms. Individuals like Stephan offer those arcs of plasmic knowledge and Anoia contemplation. And you will gain more soon in our interview. 10 years, our 10-year anniversary. Destruction and creation. It's all connected. Welcome to the desert of the real.
I will not make any deals with you. I've resigned. I will not be pushed, filed, stamped, indexed, briefed, debriefed, or numbered. My life is my own.
I am not a number. I am a free man.
Please continue to support Aeon by Gnostic Radio in any way you can, even if it's sharing and good reviews on the various channels like iTunes, YouTube, or Stitcher. Your support is essential, and much appreciation for you ghosts in the shell who throw in some shekels here and there every week. Let's do another 10 years and do so many wonders together. We're building vast universes of light as worlds crumble.
By the power of truth, I, while living, have conquered the universe.
And let us end with a quote from Stephan himself, from his book, Jung and the 7 Sermons to the Dead. If ignorance alone, according to Gnostic orthodoxy, keeps humans tied to the material world, knowledge frees them from it. Because humans are ignorant, that knowledge must come from outside them. Because the powers of the material world are ignorant too, that knowledge must come from beyond them as well. It can come only from the Godhead. The dependency of humanity on the Godhead matches the dependency of the ego on the unconscious to reveal itself. 10 years. Thank you for being there on this journey with me. Hello and goodbye as always.
To realize that all your life, not all your love, all your hate, all your memory, all your pain, it was all the same thing. It was all the same dream, a dream that you had inside a locked room. A dream about being a person. And like a lot of dreams, there's a monster at the end of it.
Well, I want to thank you again for the opportunity, and I also want to thank you for having done such fine work in this field for so long. Your interviews and your work is well known, and we are all very grateful for it.
Oh, well, thank you. Thank you so much, and thank you for all the work you've done. It's what we do, right?
That's what we do.
Yeah, I mean, I can't say anything else. It's at the end of the day.
Maybe if you permit me, I could just make one little announcement, which has to do with the recent demise of a key figure of the Gnostic revival, Jim Robinson, who died in the early part of Easter week.
Last week, yes.
I knew him very well. He was a wonderful man, and he was the great facilitator. Without his efforts, Nag Hammadi Library would probably never have seen a popular edition in English. He has done wonderful work, and he has come in the course of his work, as he told me, more than once, he has come to a sympathetic view of Gnosticism, which he, as a seminary-educated gentleman, because he was an ordained Presbyterian minister too, he did not have. He had made a great turn toward Gnosticism, and we are really all very, very grateful to him. He lived to ripe old age, and we Gnostic might say, well, we hope he'll have a real good time in the pleroma.
Yes, or of course there's always reincarnation for those of us who just don't get it, unfortunately.
Yeah, that's sort of repeating the class.
Yes, and I didn't know you met James, and what were your views of him? So you say that his interest was more than just scholarly. Like Marvin Meyer, he had a nice attitude towards those old heretics.
He was initially his interest was scholarly, but as he became more acquainted with the materials, he really began to see that this was not just kind of the sort of crazy material that the church fathers have claimed, but that there was a great deal of valuable insight here, and he became much more sympathetic to the whole idea of Gnosis. He came, this must have been about 1983 or thereabouts, he came to several of our church services. He was present at one of the Good Friday services, and we remained in touch. He celebrated his 60th birthday quite a long time ago in my company, and I many times went out to Claremont to the institute that he founded, which other people are running now, the Institute for Antiquity and Christianity, and was present at various programs. And he was really a very, very fine gentleman, and he has done us all, I think, a tremendous favor.
Oh, I would agree. I mean, that was when I picked up my first copy of the Nag Hammadi, when I barely knew about the Gnostics. His name on the book said, "This person is important. This person has made something big happen."
Oh yes, and of course he was also he was a diplomat, and he was very very smooth in his dealings with other people. He spoke excellent German. He went to school in Germany. He was a personal pupil of Bultmann. And so he was able to bridge the gap between the American scholarship, which he represented, and the European scholarship, who really wanted to hold on to Nag Hammadi. They sort of thought that it was theirs. And he managed to bridge those differences and then be able to put out really a popular edition in English, of which there were 2 editions, and then of course much later Marvin Meyer organized the so-called international edition. But certainly without Robinson, none of that would have happened.
Yes, I agree. Marvin Meyer, he is sorely missed. His contributions are also...
Marvin Meyer is of whom we knew. In fact, I just by happenstance, I had lunch with him but a few weeks before his untimely death. And he seemed in he seemed in good health at that time, but obviously there was something going on, and he was very sympathetic to the Gnostic tradition, shall we say.
And was Robinson and Meyer's relationship okay? Wasn't Robinson?
Well, I think the way it is with scholars, especially when they are at sort of at the same level of accomplishment, and there's always a certain amount of rivalry. And I think Robinson was critical to some extent of Marvin Meyer's participation in the Gospel of Judas project of National Geographic. I think he felt that was hasty and things like that, but there was no real, it was sort of typical scholarly wrangling. Because Marvin Meyer was one time an assistant to Robinson at the Institute. before he got his professorship at Chapman University, where he then remained. Marvin Mayer had no interest of going on to Columbia and Princeton and things like that. He was very happy here in California.
Yeah, with that weather, how can you blame it? And a question for you. Why did you never decide to go into academia? Why did you decide to be a theologian? Was it simply a call, or? Well,
I would say that it was a call, and which had been with me really from the beginning, because it was my intention as a child already, and then in my teens, to become a Catholic priest. And if it hadn't been for the war and all the aftermath and having to flee my country, and so I probably might have become, or at least I would have progressed further in the training for the priesthood. So that was my intention to begin with. But along with that, of course, also from childhood on, I developed a strong interest in Gnosticism, and eventually I found that these two dedications were incompatible. And then I opted for just being a Gnostic, and then eventually, when I came to discover that there was actually a Gnostic priesthood, then I became a Gnostic priest, and subsequently a Gnostic bishop.
Yes, in your life, you obviously lived under the oppressive regimes of both the Nazis and the communists, and you eventually fled to Austria, Belgium, and so forth.
Oh, yeah.
Did these inform or strengthen your view of the Gnostics, even if you might not have known too much about them? You understood maybe that this world was ruled by powers and principalities?
Oh, well, of course, yes. I would have had to be perhaps a little bit less observant than I was, not to recognize that there was titanic evil in the world, and that it wasn't just happenstance of a few wrong-headed individuals like Hitler and Stalin, but that there was something big, really something metaphysical going on here. And I had experiences to that effect of a symbolic nature, even as a small child. So that was very, very much part of my worldview. But I just had to take things in stride and somehow get through those bad times.
And how has been your journey? Obviously, the Gnostics, as you said, believe that there is metaphysical evil, or at least a deficiency in the universe. You joined the Theosophical Society for many decades after that. Has there always been a tension with other, who might say, non-dualist groups in the Gnosticism?
Not really, not on my part. I first met a couple of living Gnostics, to my great surprise, during that sort of half a year or three-quarters of a year that I spent in Belgium. And these were people who were connected with the French Gnostic or Neo-Gnostic church. Very nice gentlemen who gave me a lot of literature and a lot of information, but who, since they were fairly prominent in the business community in Belgium, they didn't want to be known with their interests. So I promised them that I would never reveal their names, and I never have. And then subsequently, they were also the first ones to advise me that, if you want something that is fairly close to Gnosticism, go to the Theosophists. And then that's what I did.
And how exactly did you end up coming all the way to L.A. and not Chicago, where the...
Well, once again, that was sort of fate, shall we say. I was at the University of Innsbruck in the Tyrol in Austria, and there were various organizations that were arranging immigration for students. were connected with YMCA and things like that. And since I wanted to, by then I wanted to leave Europe and come to the USA, I took advantage of that. And believe it or not, initially they were going to position me in Pennsylvania, in State College, Pennsylvania, which is now the State University of Pennsylvania. And then when I arrived in New York, all of a sudden I got the paper, no, you are not going to Pennsylvania, you're going to California. So I looked at the map and I said, well, that looks okay. And I traveled by train all the way from the extreme east to the extreme west, and I've been here ever since.
And when did your interest in Carl Jung spark up?
Well, actually, I was in contact with some of Jung's material already when I was in Austria. After all, it was just a hop, skip, and a jump over the Alps from there to Switzerland. And I did actually go over to Zurich one time, hoping perhaps to get a glimpse of Jung, but I couldn't. I saw the Jung Institute, I saw the buildings, but that was it. But, some of his books were already fairly prominent, and there were various people at university and so forth that really thought highly of him. So that was my first acquaintance, and then I continued with my interest thereafter. Actually, when I came to this country, I arrived here in 1952, and there was very, very little in English available in America about Jung. But then it continued.
But you met Gilles Gispel.
Oh yes, very much so, and Professor Crispel. I met him in 1975 when he was here participating in a Jungian conference that was sort of intended like an American Eranos conference, but never really made it that far. But it was still it was in 75, which was the centenary of Jung's birth. And he was here, Gershon Scholem was here, a number of other people, and that's when we first conversed, and then we remained in touch, and he came out here several times, and he actually lectured a couple of times on our auspices of the Gnostic organization and church too. So he was very sympathetic also to our cause.
And speaking of Jung and maybe changing things around a bit, you have been lecturing a lot about Jung, obviously, and especially with the release of the Red Book. Do we have any new insights as of now in the scholarship of the Red Book?
Well, the exegetical work is progressing. I am proud and happy to say that I was the first one, almost, within weeks of the publication, who gave a series of 13 lectures from A to Z about the Red Book. My series was the first attempted interpretation, and of course there were others since then, and I think it has, to me and to some people like myself, it was a reaffirmation really of Jung as a visionary prophet of a Gnostic nature, albeit a modern Gnostic. And actually that point of view, I think, has spread and is now sort of at times reluctantly accepted by pretty much everybody in the Jungian community.
So the resistance, the community was worried that people will start seeing him as a wild-eyed mystic. That has settled down. I know there was a lot of resistance.
That has settled down, but there is also, as that so often happens, there are schisms in the Jungian movement. There are about 3 different Jung institutes in Switzerland alone, and only one of them is the original Jung Institute, and another one is mostly concentrated around the writings of Marie-Louise von Franz, which is not a bad, she's not a bad guru to have.
No,
either, but so that, there are gradations, let's say, of interest and acceptance of Jung's esoteric side. But I think one of the main concerns that a lot of people had was, of course, that if Jung's message reveals itself to be much more of a quasi-religious nature, that this may then diminish the patients, the number of patients to Jungian analysts and therapists. And so they were afraid of losing income. But I think a lot of that has pretty much settled down.
Carl Jung, he knew he had the power to start a religion, to be a religious leader. But at the end of the day, he said, no, I'm just going to be a researcher in my own madness, my own vision, my own life.
Yeah, he apparently, according to even members of the Jung family with whom we had contact and so forth, he initially wanted to publish. He thought that the Red Book should be published. And then he thought differently of it and said that really that the time was not appropriate. And then the book just sat there in the Jung house, which was under the management of his son, his only son. Then recently, largely due to Dr. Sonu Shamdasani's efforts, it came to be edited and came to be published. But it's quite evident now that really the Red Book and that whole period of visionary experiences that he had was the fountain of his subsequent work. And he was just translating insights into psychological terms in all of his, in so much of his writing.
Yeah, nothing wrong with that. I mean, I think that's something, I mean, people said the Gnostics were just pumping out gospels in a form of therapy. I think everybody should do that.
Oh yes, and of course his inspiration had a lot to do with the discovery and the prominence of the Nag Hammadi library also, because as you may have heard, there's one codex which is actually Codex 1 of the collection that was not in Egypt anymore, that had been spirited out of Egypt. And CRISPR discovered it at an antiquity dealers, I think, in Belgium. And then it was purchased with American money. After all, that's where the money is, you know. It was purchased with American money for the Jung Institute and was presented to Jung on his 80th birthday. And that became the Codex 1 or the Jung Codex. And that contains, well, probably the most prominent scripture that it contains is the Gospel of Truth. Then subsequently, after Jung's death, the Codex was returned to join the entire collection in the Coptic Museum in Cairo. And then Jung, through CRISPR and others, Jung was really agitating for the publication of the translation and publication of the Nag Hammadi corpus. So we had a lot to do with it also.
And moving back to more or less your life, are there any issues or ideas that in your long career of studying the Gnostics you've had to make a 180-degree turn that you would like to share? For example, I was always, very gung-ho about the Gnostics being pre-Christian. And even now, scholars like April DeConnick, Birger Pearson, and others still, even Stephen Davis to an extent.
Yeah, I think Yamauchi before that was a big advocate of that, yeah.
Mm-hmm. So, but now these days I'm not so sure. I don't see the data going there, so I'm sort of researching. Is there anything about the Gnostics you've had to make a change that before you held out strong?
That issue really never became prominent in my thinking, because I somehow always had the notion, which is kind of theosophical too, that there has always been, let's say, a tendency and the tradition of Gnosis in the world. But when it came to the more specific formulation of the Gnostic tradition as we know it, that was definitely within the Christian period and was connected with Christianity. So I never saw a big difficulty there. Where some difficulties existed, not so much in my mind, but in the public mind, was concerning such issues as the demiurge and the demiurgic creation. And so that, let's say, in the 60s, in the 70s, I mean, we began our public work in the late 50s. It was very difficult to gain acceptance for those ideas in the eyes of the public, so that we sort of we did not suppress it, but we kept that we dealt with that issue in a low key manner. But then, as Nag Hammadi became more and more read, and more people became interested in Gnosticism, which would be sort of by the 80s and the 90s, then somehow all of a sudden the opposition to the dualism seemed to diminish considerably, and then we were able to really present the whole picture without any qualms.
Yeah, it just wasn't very popular to tell people that Jehovah was the bad guy in the play.
Yeah, that was difficult, but nowadays it seems that people are much more inclined to accept that notion.
Well, hopefully they see things more allegorically and mystically now, even the religious, very religious Orthodox.
That is the key to all of these issues, that we are not dealing with facts. We are dealing with realities which are shape changers and which are symbolic, sometimes allegorical, and which really require gnosis to understand.
By gnosis, especially to the listeners that might not be or might not really know about the concept, most people today, and I always have to argue this, assume that gnosis is the same as enlightenment or satori or anything like that. Do you find you still have to correct people on this, or?
Yes, I think that what needs to be probably mentioned is that there is definitely a relationship. We are dealing with psycho-spiritual experiences that are related to each other. When we are looking at the Buddha's notion of enlightenment, when we are looking at some of the Hindu concepts of enlightenment and moksha and kaivalya and things like that, and so forth, and gnosis, they are not identical, but they have some they have some resonance with each other, because they are experiences of consciousness of a supernal and all-encompassing and of a very salvific nature. But certainly to make one-to-one analogies between these experiences is a mistake. So that gnosis is an experience, an experiential world of its own, and it should be studied on its own, and it has its own features, it has its own merit, it's a completely united system of its own, and really the foundation of a tradition.
And another facet that I always feel is sort of overlooked, and when studying the Gnostics, is people assume, well, there were these sort of emo, dark world haters. But most scholars never speak of they have a sense of, I would say, wonder and even a sense of humor, how they parody the world. Would you agree with how humor is so important in the Gnostic worldview?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, it has been said that certainly the Christian tradition in its scriptures has said that Jesus wept, but only the Gnostic scripture said that Jesus laughed.
Right.
So the imitatio Christi, let's say, in that regard, would involve cultivating one's own sense of humor as a Gnostic, and I think it's very important. But you see, that also is so easily misunderstood. It's the like the church fathers, the mocking laughter of the Gnostic. It doesn't have to be mocking; it's just laughter. And you can even see that in the otherwise promising scholar April de Koning, who, of course, wrote a book about the Gospel of Judas, and she was sort of trying to destroy Marvin Mayer's interpretation. I don't think she really succeeded, but she, as you undoubtedly know, she tried to make out the Gospel of Judas as being a parody, as being a kind of a black comedy, and I don't think that's right either. But certainly, one has to look for the irony and for the funny parts of Gnostic scriptures, and so which are there.
No, I would agree with you, and I think it's partly because they had an experience and they felt such joy at being liberated.
Yes.
But at the same time, I think they had to use humor to keep their sanity going once they saw the reality of the world.
Absolutely, absolutely.
And what to you sometimes annoys you the most about maybe some of the modern Gnostic movement or some of the scholarship? For example, you and I have discussed before how the term Gnosticism should probably stay as much as the naysayers want to get to it, and it seems that's changing. Scholars like Dylan Burns and so forth are deciding they want to keep the term Gnosticism.
Yeah, but yes, well, of course, some years ago there was this sort of academic fad that developed, started with a professor named Williams, and then Elaine Pagels and Karen King, and some people jumped on the bandwagon that Gnostic is not a legitimate term. I always felt that was a mistaken position because, look at the immense number of sects and theologies, say, of Christianity, hundreds and hundreds, and yet they are all subsumed under the name of Christian, because they still have something in common, something important in common, so it's legitimate to call them Christian. And I think similarly, all the various movements and scriptures that have been called Gnostic have certain all-important features in common. But it needs to be kept in mind, which seemingly the other school there, Pagels and those people did not sufficiently emphasize, that the Gnostic materials, the Gnostic scriptures are, for the most part, probably entirely, they are visionary literature. These things are based on experience, as Crispo pointed out a long time ago. And that being the case, every individual's experience is bound to be somewhat different from another. We don't even experience the same meal identically, And so obviously there will be differences, but there are some very important commonalities which I think do entitle the Gnostic tradition to be called Gnostic, that tradition which is concerned with Gnosis.
And another issue that seems to be trendy with scholarship these days is that the idea that the Gnostics were never, you might say, subversive or rebellious or anything. They were part of the Christian stream, and there was nothing really controversy about what they did. Basically, Christian Neoplatonists. Do you see the Gnostics as subversive?
I think maybe that's a little bit too euphemistic to put it quite that way, because functioning as they did, at least initially arising out of the Hebraic matrix, they had to appear rebellious in terms of their attitude toward Jehovah and toward the Jewish law. But they did consider that as being part of the Christian message. And Jesus came to abrogate the old law and establish the new law of love, which can actually be substantiated even with New Testament material quite a bit. So they definitely had their own approach, and they were not just sort of mild-mannered Neoplatonists, but I think there is a backbone there, which, if necessary, does appear sometimes even in a somewhat combative fashion, which is true, for instance, with the Gospel of Judas. So, depending on the particular Gnostic visionary or visionaries with whose legacy we are dealing with, some of them might have been more rebellious, some of them might have been less rebellious, but their common orientation, their common vision of reality made them Gnostics.
And I think, as a professor at Yale, Nicola Denzi Lewis, pointed out, the idea of them turning upside down the demiurge, a very holy figure in Platonism, and the archons, who were, respected politicians in the Roman Empire, that right itself was pretty much dangerous.
Oh yeah, because certainly there can be political implications of this position, and that was dangerous. But of course, they shared that to some extent with the other Christians, of course, too. Yes, I think you are quite right if you indeed implied that the sort of countercultural projections onto the Gnostics, these were the people who believed in wild sex, and they believed, in all kinds of unusual and unlawful antinomian, as the word has it, activities. That's an exaggeration. But they definitely had doctrines and practices of their own, which were not shared by other Christians or other Jews and various people.
Yes, and even the idea of their libertine qualities, it's been sort of put under the rug, or scholars simply don't want to talk about it because there's nothing on text. But there are scholars, like even when I talked to John Turner and Jeff Kripal and Tobias Chutton, they feel that there is something to the Gnostics practicing sex magic back then. What do you think?
Well, I am familiar with Kripal's book, The Serpent's Gift, and frankly, I didn't very much like it. I think the good professor projects a lot of his own ideas onto the Gnostics without adequate justification. But we need to remember, which is after all a common practice of scholarship, we need to remember that the Gnostics functioned within a certain cultural context. And especially in the Egyptian cultural context, there was a lot of magic, including sexual magic, in Egypt at a popular level. And so, no doubt, some of that would have been crept into, or at least been considered in some fashion by Gnostics as well, since so much of the original Gnostic activity went on in Egypt, in Alexandria. But I don't think it was ever a major feature. Not any more than, I don't know, in a theosophical lodge at the present times, we might have sessions on tarot cards. That doesn't mean that tarot cards are part of Blavatsky's theosophy, but they're part of the occult culture, so we look at them, and I like them. I always did. I think that it was a factor in life, and since Freud, and so we know that, well, psychosexual forces are present very prominently, and they influence the emotional, the intellectual, even the religious and spiritual lives of people. But on the other hand, once again, it can be overdone, and I somewhat think that Jeffrey Kripal is overdoing it. He's sort of, apparently he was mostly an Indologist to begin with, and he's really bringing sort of maybe milder forms of tantricism into the picture, and I really don't know if that is justified. It's certainly not very important.
Right, like you said, the Gnostic sensibility is always to live within the context of your life. The Cathars were embrace the lifestyle of the medieval times. The Manichaean seems to have absorbed anything that was around them. The Gnostics were not just about, I hate the world and I'm going into a cave. Yeah, definitely. I mean, the Gnostic tradition in its expressions throughout history adapts itself to the spirit of the times, because that's the way that it can function. But it still maintains its own core realizations, which are always there. And these external issues are not that important. Yes, and we were talking about the psycho-spiritual, and I think, and let me know if you agree or your views on this, Dr. Hoeller, but sometimes the modern Gnostic movement appears a little too materialistic, reductionist. Suddenly the demiurge is the ego, and Mary Magdalene is my feminine side, and then suddenly before you know it, there is no supernatural magical element. But you've had plenty of supernatural experiences. There's something out there.
Oh yes. Well, that is again, that is a tendency, I think, of the present culture. Our culture has seemed, to a large extent, seems to have lost the sense of transcendence, the sense of the transcendent, and so we are trying to drag down subtle, transcendental, mystical things to as concrete a level as we possibly can. And that, I think, is unfortunate. I think the proper Gnostic position would be that there are certain principles which reflect themselves at various levels. And so at the personal psychological level, the ego indeed may work like the demiurge. But that doesn't mean that the ego is the only demiurge. It's a reflection of the greater demiurge, and so there are these reflections, but the reflection should not be mistaken for the agency that casts the reflection.
Yes, I know. Sometimes I hear occultists running around going, "Oh, as above, so below," and I'm like, "Yes, if the demiurge is above, there's demiurges on this earth.
Is also below." Yes, well, and of course there is a certain amount of conflict, let's say, with a kind of popular, kind of bowdlerized Hermeticism and Gnosticism, and sort of, the common idea being as above, so below, which is of course on the Emerald Tablet and all that sort of thing. As if there's a big conflict that the Hermetic tradition is a world-affirming tradition, and the Gnostic is a pessimistic, world-denying tradition. But that is really that is really wrong. I would say that there is sort of proto-scientific, spiritual scientific interest in Hermeticism, in people like Giordano Bruno and so forth, in the worlds visible and invisible. But when it all in the foundations, I think the Hermetic and the Gnostic are kissing cousins.
Yes, I think they both really fall into the two-world paradigm. Doesn't matter how good or bad the world is down here. This is not our home. Our home is beyond the stars.
Yes, yes.
Yeah, and that's where we need to reach. And on a little side note, it seems such movies as The Matrix probably is not only the most famous modern myth, it is truly one of the best representations of a Gnostic myth. Then you look at the works of Philip K. Dick and others.
Absolutely.
Why do you think science fiction lends itself so well to Gnosticism?
Well, I suppose because it is imaginative. It calls upon the deeper faculties of insight and fantasy on the part of the writers and the authors, and so that it touches the kind of experiential activity that Gnostics engaged in always. There is the science. Some of the science fiction people are operating, moving around in the same territory as the Gnostics, although they may not see sort of zero in, if we can use that colloquial expression, quite to the same realities, but there is a good science fiction material like Philip K. Dick is to a large extent based on experience, as indeed are the documents of the Gnostics.
And maybe you could explain a little bit more about this. In Neoplatonism, the idea of imagination is so important, but that never seems to be spoken about how important it was for the Gnostics, even though Carl Jung was very much into the active imagination. But you would say imagination is very important in any Gnostic pursuit.
Oh yes, absolutely. And of course it was recognized as the key to magic in the Middle Ages, and Albertus Magnus and all sorts of people who were dealing with alchemy and with magic all thought very, very highly of the imaginatio, and I think that it's implicit in Gnostic scriptures, such as I think it's Gospel of Philip. The truth did not come into the world naked, but it came in the types and images. The world will not recognize it any other fashion. So the images have to be there, and we contribute to those images with imagination, the making of images. But the images are not the reality. The images are the garb which the reality assumes.
Yes, and behind that, those are those sublime forces that we are meant to touch upon.
Oh yes, and of course, once again, the complexity, I think, of the Gnostic worldview is rooted in the complexity of the experiential realms of consciousness. Once we enter those realms, we do a bit of traveling in the, whatever we want to call them, the inner worlds, and we see that how complex they are, and there are levels upon levels upon levels, like the mansions of heavens and of the aeons, and some of them are pleasant and some of them are unpleasant, and they go on and on and on and on and on and on. And the kind of simplistic mind conditioned by maybe Protestant Christianity, there is just me and God, in that same order, of course. I'm more important than God, really. And to that kind of mind, these Gnostic accounts of Gnostic experience seem crazy, but they are experiences.
Yes, and and all experiences are valid, and all experiences are real. It's just more nuanced. And what do you think about alchemy? There have some who've said that alchemy, as we know it, how occultism know it, is really more of Carl Jung putting his own take on it. That it was never really a spiritual pursuit before the 19th century, before the Golden Dawn and so forth.
No, I wouldn't agree with that. I think Jung was right, but of course, like in every tradition, let's say in the Christian tradition or in Islamic tradition, also the people who looked at this discipline in a spiritual manner, the spiritual practitioners, were very much in a minority among the alchemists, and so certainly there were a lot of alchemists who just really wanted to make gold and medicines and things of that sort. And the transcendentally oriented ones were in a minority, but it would seem that they were present. And I think it was Crispell who said that the alchemy was the yoga of the Gnostics. And of course, in that respect, Jung did not make any difference between Hermetics and Gnostics, because with Zosimos and people like that, real early alchemists, he said that was still, that was really, it was pretty much the same as Gnosticism, and it was. So I think alchemy definitely is a valuable and beautiful discipline, and when I had an access, still do, because now at the Getty Museum here, a very fine alchemical collection that belonged to a man who was pretty much my employer for about 20 years, the late Mr. Manly Palmer Hall. And Mr. Hall had a beautiful collection of alchemical materials, including a very nice copy of the Ripley scroll and a number of others. And when you look at those things, just viewing these images sends you into a Gnostic state, So it's definitely a visionary discipline.
How is life for you? Are you will you continue with the Ecclesia Gnostica, or have you found a successor, or how is life for you?
Oh yes, well, it is my hope, but of course hopes are not always realized, that this particular kind of work will go on. I'm now 84 years old. If I make it one more year, I will have my 50th anniversary as a bishop, which of course is just time anyway, and time is a counterfeit of eternity, as we know. But it is my hope that it can continue. I have, unlike some other people who rightly or wrongfully call themselves Gnostic bishops, I have not consecrated all kinds of bishops. I have a designated successor whom I consecrated as bishop, who lives in Portland, Oregon, a very fine man of great Gnosis, and I have a good number of clergy, and it is my hope that they will be able to continue. No doubt, as time goes on, there will be probably some changes, but my main reason for this is not just to preserve my legacy, because it's not my legacy, it's the legacy of the Gnostics, but there has to be a spiritual practice, or several, for a Gnostic. Otherwise, it'll become just another theoretical issue and maybe of some low-level visionary activity. There has to be a steady spiritual practice. And I have found the sacramental practice to be a very effective, very good spiritual practice. No doubt there may be others will come up, but it is my hope, therefore, that the Ecclesia in some fashion will survive me.
Yes, and Carl Jung certainly agreed that the ecclesiastical rituals were a great method for inner knowing. The last one, perhaps, in the 19th century.
He has the famous the famous essay on this transformation symbolism in the Mass, for instance, and others. And he was really quite, he had a good relationship, even though he was a Protestant pastor's son and all that, he had a good relationship with the Catholic Church. And the Pope Pius sent him a special blessing at one time.
Oh, wow.
Which is not often accorded to Protestants.
No. Maybe a little bit today with the latest Pope. It's getting better.
Oh, well, yeah, well, he will bless anything. Yeah, I don't mind going even on record about it. I call him Francis the Talking Pope, because years ago there were some movies of Francis the Talking Mule, and that's how he talks, and he talks and talks and talks and talks. But then, there are all kinds of popes in history.
Yes, all mortals.
Oh, yeah. But we have to be very careful under all circumstances that the search for Gnosis and the activities within the Gnostic tradition don't become an intellectually fixed situation or system, because that's not what they are supposed to be. They have intellectual implications, but that's not their core. So that is always something that needs to be kept in mind.
You can't think your way to Gnosis.
And also, let's say, when things begin to devolve too much into a rather unproductive magical situation, no doubt the Gnostics lived in a period of history when magic, theology, all kinds of whatever you want to call them, was very common. And so they undoubtedly had their own practices, involvements of that sort. I think April the Conic is particularly interested in magic, and so she's dug up some interesting things, which actually are much more interesting than her take on Judas. But one has to be careful not to get too fascinated by that, because again, it's of necessity that relates to a lesser stratum of reality, although of course there is high magic, angel magic and things like that too, but one has to be careful not to get fascinated by the scenery on the path to the summit, shall we say. It's okay to smell the flowers, but don't spend too much time there. Keep going.
Yes, it's all about liberation. The cosmic awakening of an individual.
Obviously, yes.
And for the listener, Dr. Hoeller will be at the Theosophical Society this summer, and I hope to be there, and I hope you listeners will be there too.
Yeah, it's in the middle of July, and I think some of the activities are public, so people who are interested in Chicagoland and around there may inquire from the Theosophical Society in Whitney, Illinois, and they will give them the information.
And don't go by accident to Wheaton College, the nemesis.
Yeah, better not. Yeah, that's a very different place. Yes.
Talk about a duality right outside the city.
Oh yeah. It's sort of the duality is right there. It's very interesting how that works. Well, thank you so very much, Mr. Connor. You have done a great work, and we wish you all the best. And you are in our good wishes and in our prayers with your work, and I was very happy to have been able to participate in this dialogue.
It was a wonderful conversation, Dr. Hoeller, and thank you very much.
Thank you. All the best to you, and hope to see you maybe in Chicagoland in the summer.
I will be there. Thank you, sir.
All right, sir. Bye-bye.
Please support AM Bite Gnostic Radio in any way you can. A few shekels here or there. Join my Patreon campaign. Buy some of me reality-dispanding, mind-expanding books like Voices of Gnosticism, Heretic, or Stargazer. Subscribe to our archive of past shows. Your continued donations keep this Red Pill cafeteria open. The various avenues to assist me are found at thegodabovegod.com. Support alternative media, away from the few corporations that own all mainstream media. I should mention that I am an Amazon.com affiliate, so any books you order from thegodabovegod.com grant me a kickback. In fact, if you order anything, whether it's clothes, appliances, or sex toys, click through the site and I will get a kickback from that as well. Even if you don't order anything advertised at thegodabovegod.com. Much appreciation to you, Knights of Valis, Shining Crazy Diamonds, and Rainbows in the Dark who support this blasphemy on a weekly basis. Write your own gospel and live your own myth.